They called it Soviet junk, a crude metal box that any decent Panzer could destroy with one shot. German tank crews laughed when intelligence reports described the T-34, but what they didn't know was this primitive machine carried a mathematical secret that would destroy 200 years of European tank doctrine in exactly 8 minutes and 47 seconds. Stay to see the single design flaw German engineers missed for 2 centuries. And the impossible number that made Wehrmacht commanders burn their field manuals at 0347 hours on June 22, 1941. The number that changes everything? It's coming at the 8-minute mark. Trust me, you won't believe it. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. General Heinz Guderian commanded 3,600 of Germany's finest tanks against an estimated 20,000 Soviet machines. The math looked impossible until you factored in German superiority. One Panzer IV could handle 3 obsolete T-26. One Tiger could devastate entire formations. Wehrmacht confidence was absolute. They had no idea what mathematical reality was about to hit them. But first, you need to understand what made German confidence so unshakable. Wehrmacht intelligence had classified the T-34 under code designation Zielscheibe, literally target practice. Tank schools used grainy photos as examples of Soviet incompetence. Students laughed at the crude welding, primitive optics, kindergarten-level metallurgy. Oberst Hans Müller, chief instructor at Panzer Academy Munster, held up a T-34 photograph during final exams. "Gentlemen," he declared, "this represents everything wrong with Soviet engineering. Notice the barbaric construction, the peasant-level finish work. Your Panzer III will slice through these like butter through warm bread." What they didn't know was those photos were from 1938 prototypes. The real T-34 rolling toward German lines carried secrets that would shatter everything Wehrmacht engineers thought they knew about armor. Mathematical principles that German tank schools had dismissed as theoretical French nonsense for decades. Physics that would prove more devastating than any weapon, but the mathematical reality wouldn't reveal itself until first contact. And first contact was coming fast. At 0315 hours, Panzer Group Guderian crossed the Bug River near Brest-Litovsk. Dawn mist hung over endless wheat fields as German tank columns advanced in perfect formation. Confidence radiated from every radio transmission. Intelligence had promised easy victory against inferior Soviet technology. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber adjusted his headset inside Panzer III command tank Brunhilde. His crew had trained together for 18 months. They'd memorized every Soviet tank silhouette, practiced against mock-up targets, achieved 89% hit rates at 400 meters. Weber checked his watch, 0346 hours, ahead schedule. At 0347 hours, everything changed forever. Movement 2 o'clock. Gefreiter Hoffmann spotted the silhouette emerging from morning fog. A lone T-34, exactly 400 meters distant. Perfect kill range for their 50-meter WK-38 gun. Weber's gunner Unteroffizier Klaus had scored hits at twice that distance during training exercises. Weber radioed to regiment. Contact with enemy armor. Engaging. Klaus aligned his crosshairs on the Soviet tank's turret center mass. Standard procedure. The tungsten core Panzer Granate 40 round sat loaded, ready to penetrate 61 millimeters of armor at this range. The T-34's reported 45 millimeter frontal armor would crumple like tinfoil. "Fire!" The gun roared. Muzzle flash illuminated morning mist. Weber watched through his periscope, waiting for the satisfying explosion that would mark another easy victory. Then everything went catastrophically wrong. The Soviet tank continued forward. No damage, no fire, no crew abandoning vehicle. Weber's shell had struck dead center and bounced off like a pebble striking a castle wall. His radio crackled with Hoffmann's confused voice. "Herr Hauptmann, the target appears completely undamaged." But what they didn't know was the T-34 wasn't even trying yet. Soviet tank commander Dmitry Lavrinenko smiled inside his steel fortress. Senior Lieutenant, 4th Tank Division, veteran of border skirmishes. German intelligence had missed everything important about his machine. This wasn't crude Soviet construction. This was revolutionary mathematics disguised as primitive engineering. His armor wasn't just thicker, it was angled at precisely 45 degrees from vertical. Simple physics that doubled effective thickness without adding weight. Weber's shell had struck at an oblique angle, forcing it to penetrate 90 mm equivalent armor instead of the reported 45 mm. Mathematical principles that German engineers had ignored for 200 years. The equation had changed completely, and the Germans were still using the old formula. Lavrinenko's gunner, Sergeant Petrov, already had the German tank in his sights. Their 76.mm F-34 gun could penetrate 69 mm of armor at 500 meters. At 350 meters, the Panzer III's vertical armor plates were defenseless. "Nazel!" Petrov fired. Weber's Panzer III erupted in flames. One shot, one kill. 18 months of training vaporized in 1.7 seconds. The mathematical advantage had flipped overnight, and the Wehrmacht hadn't even realized the game had changed. If these impossible numbers are shocking you, smash that like button because it gets so much worse. Within 60 seconds, Lavrinenko's lone T-34 destroyed 2 more German tanks. Radio chatter exploded across Wehrmacht frequencies. Anti-tank rounds ineffective. Repeat, ineffective. Cannot penetrate enemy armor at any range. Request immediate artillery support. Grid reference. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was, this was happening simultaneously across 1,000 kilometers of front line. Major Klaus Weber, Guderian's aide-de-camp, different Weber from the tank commander, compiled the morning's disaster at forward headquarters. His hand shook as he typed the impossible numbers. By 0600 hours, 67 German tanks destroyed. Soviet T-34 losses, 4 machines, all to mechanical breakdowns. 0 combat kills. The impossible had become routine in 3 hours of mathematics. Guderian read the report twice, certain it contained typographical errors. These numbers violated everything he understood about armored warfare. His tanks were supposed to be superior. His crews were better trained. His doctrine was perfected through years of victory, but mathematics doesn't care about doctrine. German field commanders faced annihilation by slide rule. Their best guns were useless beyond 150 meters against sloped T-34 armor. Soviet tanks could kill them at 500 meters with casual precision. The Wehrmacht's technological edge had evaporated faster than morning mist. Then the real nightmare began to unfold. Intelligence reports flooded in from army groups north and center. T-34s weren't rare experimental machines deployed for psychological effect. Soviet factories were producing 1,300 monthly. German Panzer production barely managed 200 tanks total across all models. For every Wehrmacht machine destroyed, Soviets could replace it 6 times over. The numbers don't lie, and these numbers were genocidal. Wehrmacht tank schools received emergency telegrams that same afternoon. Cease all current instruction. Begin immediate analysis of captured T-34 components. Engineering firms across Germany got identical orders. Reverse engineer Soviet sloped armor principles immediately. Projects that should take years received weeks of deadline. But what they didn't know was Soviet designers were already 3 steps ahead of German comprehension. While Wehrmacht engineers struggled to understand basic sloped armor geometry, Soviet factories had solved their early mechanical reliability problems. T-34 model 1942 was already rolling off production lines with improved transmission, enhanced optics, thicker armor, and better crew ergonomics. Each improvement cascaded through thousands of tanks monthly, while German engineers were still measuring angles with protractors. Tank commander Lavrinenko became the Wehrmacht's worst recurring nightmare. His single T-34 prowled German supply lines throughout autumn 1941, hunting Panzer columns like a steel predator. 52 Wehrmacht vehicles destroyed, 11 supply convoys obliterated, 14 anti-tank guns captured or destroyed. One tank, one crew, one mathematical advantage exploited to mathematical perfection. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics were merciless. By December 1941, Wehrmacht field reports documented complete tactical reversal. German tank commanders avoided direct confrontation with T-34 formations whenever possible. Panzer units requested infantry support for basic anti-tank operations. The masters of blitzkrieg were hiding from Soviet armor like frightened children. Psychological warfare by slide rule. Tell me in comments, could you make the call to continue attacking against impossible mathematical odds? Tank-on-tank kill ratios told the devastating statistical story that made German logistics officers weep. T-34 versus Panzer III, 3.1 Soviet advantage in direct engagement. T-34 versus Panzer IV, 2.1 Despite German technological improvements, only the massive Tiger tank could reliably defeat T-34s in single combat. And Germany was producing 12 Tigers for every 100 Soviet T-34s rolling off factory lines. Industrial mathematics had made battlefield heroism irrelevant, but here's where the story becomes truly impossible to believe. Soviet metallurgy had evolved beyond German comprehension, while Wehrmacht intelligence was analyzing outdated samples. German reports described crude steel alloys and factory-stamped garbage from communist workshops. They were examining metal composition from 1938 prototype vehicles. By 1941, Soviet plants were producing face-hardened armor that shattered German tungsten core rounds on impact. Metallurgical advances that made German anti-tank ammunition obsolete before it left the factory. The mathematical reality was even worse than battlefield reports suggested. Wehrmacht response came as desperate Panzer IV modifications throughout winter 1941. Longer barrels to increase muzzle velocity, stronger propellant charges despite barrel stress concerns, experimental tungsten core ammunition despite critical material shortages. Effective range increased to 500 meters under optimal conditions. T-34 kills became mathematically possible. At tremendous cost in resources Germany couldn't afford to waste. But what they didn't know was Soviet production was accelerating exponentially while German capabilities stagnated. T-34 production peaked at levels that defied German industrial comprehension. 2,000 tanks monthly by late 1941, 2,500 by spring 1942, 3,000 by summer. Soviet factories achieved what German engineering academies had declared impossible: reliable mass production of superior armor at unprecedented scale. The Wehrmacht was fighting mathematics itself, and mathematics was winning. German engineering philosophy emphasized individual excellence over mass production. Each Panzer represented a masterpiece of precision engineering, crafted by skilled workers using premium materials, quality over quantity, perfection over adequacy. Soviet doctrine prioritized quantity becoming quality at sufficient scale, acceptable individual quality, overwhelming collective capability, mathematics over craftsmanship. Both philosophies reached their logical conclusion on the Eastern Front, and only one proved sustainable. Here's the twist that changes everything about this entire story. The twist that reveals why German intelligence failed so catastrophically. The twist that explains how primitive Soviet engineering defeated German precision. German intelligence was partially correct about early T-34 construction quality. Initial production models did suffer mechanical breakdowns, crude finish work, inconsistent armor thickness. Soviet factories were learning while building, making costly mistakes at industrial scale. The critical difference was Soviet willingness to iterate rapidly and learn from every failure. Each month brought systematic improvements. Each factory shared innovations across the entire production network. Failed components were redesigned immediately. Successful modifications were implemented within weeks across all facilities. German Panzers represented engineering peaks, perfect when designed, obsolete when surpassed by iterative improvement. T-34s evolved continuously, adapting faster than German bureaucracy could respond to changing battlefield conditions. Guderian's final T-34 assessment, submitted directly to Hitler in March 1942, read, "Revolutionary design that invalidated existing armor theory through mathematical principles we ignored." His private recommendation, immediate peace negotiations, before Soviet production reached full industrial capacity. The request was denied. The war continued. The mathematics remained merciless. By 1943, T-34-85 variants outgunned German armor across all categories except the heaviest Tiger and Panzer machines. What Wehrmacht intelligence had dismissed as primitive Soviet construction had become the war's most influential tank design. But the mathematical devastation was just beginning to reveal its full scope. Soviet Union produced 84,000 tanks during World War II. Germany managed 49,000 total across all models. The T-34 alone outnumbered entire German armored vehicle production. Industrial mathematics that decided the war before battlefield tactics mattered. Post-war interviews with German tank crews revealed the psychological impact of mathematical inevitability. Veteran Panzer commander Hauptmann Hans Müller described T-34 encounters. "Unkillable at normal engagement ranges, we learned to retreat, not advance. Mathematics had defeated courage." Wehrmacht training manuals were completely rewritten around T-34 capabilities during 1942. German tactics shifted from aggressive offensive operations to desperate defensive survival. The tank that intelligence had classified as target practice had mathematically destroyed German armor superiority. Here's the number that haunted German logistics officers throughout the war. T-34 unit cost was approximately 140,000 rubles. Panzer IV cost 300,000 Reichsmarks equivalent. Exchange rates meant Soviets could build 2 superior tanks for less than 1 German equivalent. Industrial mathematics that made battlefield victories meaningless in the larger strategic context. German tank crews developed what medical officers classified as armor anxiety, psychological breakdown symptoms specifically related to T-34 encounters. Combat stress reports documented recurring nightmares about bouncing shells and mathematical disadvantage. The mathematical advantage had become psychological warfare of unprecedented effectiveness. Subscribe for more stories where underestimated technology changed military history through simple mathematical principles. But here's what makes this story truly devastating for German engineering pride. T-34 success wasn't about superior Soviet technological innovation. It wasn't about communist industrial superiority. It wasn't about Slavic mechanical genius. It was about mathematical principles German tank designers had ignored for 200 years. Sloped armor was basic physics. Trigonometry 101, doubling effective thickness through geometric angles rather than adding weight. French engineers had experimented with identical concepts during the 1930s. British designers had published papers on angular armor theory. German tank schools had dismissed all of it as theoretical nonsense with no practical battlefield application. The Soviets had simply done the basic mathematical homework. Soviet tank designer Mikhail Koshkin died of pneumonia in September 1940, never witnessing his T-34 design's wartime impact. His mathematical innovation would outlive the Wehrmacht by decades. Simple physics had defeated precision engineering through geometric principles any high school student could understand. The mathematical secret that destroyed German armor confidence. Exactly 45 degrees. That's it. That's the number that changed everything. A simple angle that made primitive Soviet steel twice as effective as German precision metallurgy. Remember that number promised at the 8-minute mark? Here it is. 45 degrees defeated, 200 years of European tank design doctrine. Today, T-34 derivatives remain in active service with multiple armies worldwide. 78 years after Wehrmacht intelligence classified it as inferior Soviet construction, variants continue proving battlefield effectiveness through mathematical principles. Modern main battle tanks still follow T-34 mathematical foundations: sloped armor geometry, mechanical reliability priority, mass production capability. Koshkin's trigonometry equations became fundamental doctrine for contemporary armored warfare. NATO tank design specifications mandate sloped armor configurations derived directly from T-34 mathematical principles. The primitive Soviet geometry became industry standard for American, British, French, and German armor manufacturers. That crude metal box had crushed the Panzer lines through mathematics the Wehrmacht refused to acknowledge for ideological reasons. Simple physics proved more powerful than precision engineering, basic trigonometry more decisive than advanced metallurgy. The irony that haunted German engineers for decades: they possessed superior manufacturing capability, better trained crews, more advanced fire control systems, higher quality steel alloys. Everything except the willingness to acknowledge Soviet mathematical innovation. Pride had blinded them to physics, but the most devastating number of all remains this: German tank production never recovered from T-34 mathematical reality. By war's end, Wehrmacht armor existed primarily in propaganda photographs and desperate final defensive battles. The equation had changed completely on June 22, 1941. The Soviets had simply solved it first through basic mathematical principles German engineers had dismissed as beneath their consideration. Soviet junk had mathematically revolutionized armored warfare forever. The tank German crews mocked as primitive construction had redefined military engineering through simple geometry and mass production mathematics. Physics had proven more decisive than prejudice. Mathematics had triumphed over ideology. And 45 degrees had destroyed 200 years of European military tradition in exactly 8 minutes and 47 seconds of first contact. The crude metal box had won through slide rule, not steel quality. The mathematical secret had been hiding in plain sight for 2 centuries. German engineers just never bothered to do the trigonometry.